Neil Gray, Stadtforscher und Aktivist. Die Zerstörung des öffentlichen Wohnungsbaubestands in Glasgow.
We can see here the blocks at Site Hill in Glasgow, very, very close to the city centre. And in 1964 there was 10 blocks built with approximately 2,500 homes. So you're probably talking about 8 to 10,000 people. It's probably quite a conservative estimate of how many people was there. And like a lot of high-rise blocks in Glasgow, they've suffered from terrible disinvestment and neglect, and not just the blocks, of course, but the people who live inside them. And over the years, the area has become gradually more stigmatised, and that became even worse at a certain point when a lot of asylum seekers came to live in Site Hill, as they did in many other of the high-rise blocks in Glasgow, because Glasgow City Council could make a lot of money from housing asylum seekers in high-rise blocks, and they were paid by the Home Office to do that. Glasgow was one of the main centres for asylum seekers to come to the UK. So around about the mid-2000s, then Glasgow City Council started to talk about demolishing the blocks, and there was strong resistance to this by a local community group called Site Hill Save Our Homes, who were associated with another group called Glasgow Save Our Homes, these groups kind of emerged as well out of the campaign against stock transfer. Stock transfer in the UK is the transfer by ballot, or a ballot which gives tenants the choice to either stay in their homes, which are public homes, council homes, but get no investment whatsoever, and so to stay in blocks that have already seen maybe 20 years of neglect, or to vote yes to stock transfer to a housing association and then get recladding, new kitchens, the housing debt wiped off. So this was in Glasgow, 81,000 homes were transferred in stock transfer. In lots of other cities like Edinburgh, that was challenged. So in a way, that was beginning to shape a lot of the discourse about what was happening in Site Hill. And as I said, in about the mid-2000s, the City Council said, well, look, we want to demolish all these blocks. The local community responded, tenants' action groups responded and said, no way, we don't want that to happen. The compromise was that 5 blocks were demolished around about 2007, 2008. The council then said, we will definitely retain the rest of the blocks. Then they came back again and said, no, we want to demolish all 5 of the blocks. And around about 2008, 2009, they decided they were going to demolish another 3 blocks, and then the last 2 blocks would definitively, not be demolished. And now, as we see, coming to the mid-2016, they're demolishing these 2 blocks. So what's very, very interesting about these set of blocks, though, is that there was a programme initiated in around 2007 called Transforming Communities Glasgow, and that involves 8 different areas of the city, which are all, the landlord for all these areas is Glasgow Housing Association, and the total amount of stock is 11,000 homes, was 11,000 homes, and initially what they said is they would demolish all 11,000 homes and replace them with, these were all public homes, replace them with 6,000 private homes and 3,000 social homes. So in that initial plan there would have been a net loss of social housing of 8,000 homes in these 8 different areas of the city, with Site Hill being the biggest area. Then they revised that plan, and now there will be 6,500 private homes once all 11,000 homes, public homes, have been demolished, and there will be 650 social rented homes. So that's 10,400 homes, social homes, reduced since approximately 2007, 2008. So it's a kind of...
Where are all the people?
This is a very, very difficult question to answer, as always, as always. Still, possibly in Glasgow, Glasgow had a high proportion of public housing stock and social housing stock in comparison to most cities in the UK. So maybe some people have still got transfers, but I think more and more now you will be seeing cramming into private housing, and more people. I think at one point you could demolish a block and there would be surplus properties elsewhere, and I think that increasingly is not the case. So of course it's a very resource intensive kind of form of research to follow up that, where do people go question, and I can't say for sure actually about that, but I know that from 1964, when there was 2,500 public housing tenants, they are not in the 140 social rented homes that are being built once this new development is built and all the blocks are demolished. So, I think the scale of demolition in Glasgow is massive, precisely because Glasgow always had such a massively high proportion of public housing, and under a Labour government which nodded towards the left, at least, and kind of social democratic ends, much of that was attained for a long time, but certainly by the 80s New Labour were beginning to transform that stock towards private housing, and now I think since the Labour Party have essentially become a neoliberal party par excellence, that kind of policy shift has led to a kind of virus of privatisation across Glasgow, because it's always been, in a sense, a kind of deeply controlled by the Labour Party. So that shift in the 90s, especially in the 2000s, has been really, really dramatic in terms of what's happened to public housing.
The last one is totally empty.
Yeah.
Because there's no light.
Yeah. They're
and
all
the
empty.
Three buildings behind, what is the perspective of them? They are newer.
I don't know, they're in Springburn, so there's actually a road between those buildings.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting to point out now is if we were here 2 years ago, we would see the Red Road blocks, which were 7 massive high-rise blocks, much further on, but they'd kind of still dominate this view. And the Red Road blocks were demolished en masse 2015. The highest blocks that had been built in Glasgow, actually, apart from 2 blocks on the east end of the city, and very kind of famous blocks. There was a film made about Red Road, and highly, highly contested, and again they held a lot towards the end because they had a lot of void housing. They held a lot of asylum seekers. So these 2 blocks schemes have been very, very significant in terms of almost like a symbolic discourses, territorial stigmatisation, discourses of blight and decline in the city here. They've been very representative of that shift away from kind of decent, a shift that's a kind of like a right-wing discursive shift of decent public housing, moving towards a residual form of housing, a second choice behind kind of buying your own home or private rent, and they've been really kind of essential to making that argument work in many ways. But what I know from coming here in the past is that there was a really active community in Sighthill at one time, and were very, very resistant to this process, all the way along. But as you can see, this area, it's actually cut off from the city centre by the M8, which the motorway that just smashed through the city in the 1960s. You can't see the motorway. This area is kind of it's sort of fragmented, it's very, very broken up. It's certainly not a dense urban fabric, so it's difficult, to maintain a level of organisation here. I think people were working often in isolation, and they had some relation to kind of city centre housing networks, but it's hard to really retain that when you don't have a massive population, and also when blocks are coming down year on year through demolition, and there's been no investment in the buildings at all.
Is this demolition in the collective consciousness of the Glasgow inhabitants?
It is, less so than the Red Road flats. The Red Road flats was particularly noxious because at the opening of the Commonwealth Games event, which a large sport and mega event that occurred in the east end of the city in 2014, one of the ideas that the City Council had was that it would actually have a live stream of the demolition of Red Road high-rise blocks and on the opening event of the Commonwealth Games. There was a huge reaction across the city and across Scotland to that. It's just something that was unbelievably tasteless and frankly quite brutal to even think about that. So there was a huge kind of online campaign, and the idea was booted out in the end. But the block still came down, and we're talking about the scale of demolition across the city of high-rise blocks in Glasgow is really kind of phenomenal, really, really phenomenal. It seems like there's constantly, everywhere you look, there's a block coming down, and it's as if they want to just eradicate any kind of residue of social democratic public housing, municipal socialism, whatever you want to call it, in the city, just wipe it off the skyline. And the model now was very much the kind of privatised front and back garden, But what the most striking thing, I think, when you see something like these 10 blocks going down is just how little actually replaces it, and then how much pressure that puts on the existing housing stock. So here in Sighthill specifically, there'll be 600 private homes and 140 social rented homes. But this is all through through a housing association. So this shift has been really dramatic as well in the UK, especially in London, of course, but more so across the UK now, that housing associations now, they build for private rent or for private sale or for part buy. Housing associations used to just do social rent, So there's been a really dramatic transformation in terms of what's called social housing, what's called affordable housing. Maybe an answer to your question, is this in the public consciousness? Not enough. I hold a lot of information about this, and I need to write and distribute it and let more people know about it. But in general, it's kind of over the hill. People don't really see it so much in the city centre. It's kind of a little bit hidden away. But what's maybe also really important to say is this area we're in, very, very close to the city centre, is hundreds of acres of brownfield land. So demolishing a block like this is a way of land parcelling and making this a potentially, this area potentially profitable for urban investment. But in a way you need to, from the point of view of the planners and the point of view of the developers, they need to eradicate this kind of image, and those kind of people who live in that type of housing. It's like eradicate the area, erase the traces, and then transplant a different type of community. And there's different little types of, you can't see them from here, but little a cultural quarter initiative kind of nearby that's extremely instrumental It doesn't have any basis, not even in the traditional kind of cultural gentrification model of artists moving in and squatting an area or whatever, and then this kind of builds up some head of steam. It's literally a transplantation into that area in order to kind of try to catalyse urban investment strategies in this area. It's so blatant, it's unbelievable really. So that's kind of what's happening in this area in a wider context.